Once again, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight for the second presentation in our three-part series, Pollinators and Their Native Plants, with ecological landscape designer Maya Goer-Palenzuela. My name is Ellie Reese. I'm a member of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway Planning Committee. The Woodstock Pollinator Pathway is dedicated to encouraging community members, organizations, businesses, and municipalities to rethink their landscaping practices to build closely connected habitat for pollinators. Our motto is native plants, pesticide free. We hope you will join us. We encourage you to visit our website where we offer a wealth of resources to help in your pollinator planting journey. The website will be in the chat shortly. If you can remember it, it's woodstocknypollinatorpathway.org. We do offer our programming free of charge, but we do welcome donations to help support our programs. There will be a donation link also provided in the chat very shortly. I am so happy to have Maya Goer-Palenzuela back with us tonight. Maya is a New York Botanical Garden New York Botanical Garden certified landscape designer. She designs native landscapes for her business Harmonyscape Landscape Design based in Stanfordville. For decades, many gardeners have preferred to fill their garden beds with ornamental plants from exotic locations. While visually appealing, those exotic plants often require great effort to grow and provide very little, if any, benefit to pollinators, while also crowding out the native plants pollinators need to survive. Tonight, Maya will teach us how to choose native plants that best support pollinators and how to set ourselves up for planting success by choosing plants best for our ecoregion. We'll have a Q&A period after Maya's presentation. We ask you to use the chat to ask your questions. And if anyone has any questions of a technical nature, you can also reach me through the chat. And now I'd like to welcome Maya to take it away.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And big thank you again to the Woodstock Land Conservancy for asking me to give this presentation on a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. And thank you so much to the audience and everyone who is participating tonight. I had a lovely time last time and got to talk to you a lot, even after the presentation was done. So that was really great. And I'm just so, it just warms my heart to think that, there are people that share the same values I do and are very excited about it. And so thanks. Okay, I am going to share my screen. Okay. And here I just have a few of the resources that I used to put together this presentation. I explained last time that, I'm not a biologist and I don't have a master's in any kind of science, but I am very good at pulling together good information and looking for good sources. So none of this is fake news. Okay. Oh, great. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to talk about native plants and how to choose the best native plants for your area. And in order to even start this conversation, we'll need to talk about a biome. And a biome is a large community of vegetation and wildlife adapted to a specific climate. A biome is a large area characterized by its vegetation, soil, climate, and wildlife. There are 5 major types of biomes: aquatic, grassland, forest, desert, and tundra. Though some of these biomes can be further divided into more specific categories such as freshwater, marine, savanna, tropical rainforest, temperate rainforest, and taiga. And then we'll also talk about ecoregions, which is, we'll look at some maps and they will show all the different ecoregions, which is a really interesting way of thinking about, the earth. And, because a lot of times, we think of native plants, like what is a native plant? Okay, a native plant is something that is found naturally in the contiguous United States. Well, the United States is a piece of land, but it's divvied up. The plants don't know they're in the United States, right? So the plants can vastly differ from Texas to California to Montana to Connecticut. And even within those territorial boundaries, which the government has imposed on the landscape, you also have great varieties in different types of ecoregions. So I've geared this presentation to talk specifically about the ecoregions where I think that a lot of the audience may have a lot of familiarity with. So, in New York, and then I'll show this. So we'll talk about level 1, which is here, and it is a northern forest and eastern temperate forests. So this is the eastern temperate forest, and here's the northern forest. And sometimes they intersect a little bit as you head down south along the Hudson River and further into Pennsylvania. But those are mainly the types of ecoregions that we will discuss in terms of native plants that populate these areas. And then if you want to even get a little bit more detailed, and these maps get very, very detailed, we'll talk about the Atlantic highlands and the mixed wood plains. So I believe Woodstock is Atlantic highlands. Mixed wood plains, I think, is a little bit further south, just for clarification. And then at level 3, you have the Northern Highlands, the Northeastern Coastal Zone, and the Northern Piedmont. And I believe Woodstock is in the Northern Highlands. The Northeastern Coastal Zone is a little bit, I think that is along the Hudson River, I believe. And then the Northern Piedmont is a little bit further south. I included areas a little bit further south in case there were people who also have another residence a little bit further south, maybe towards the city or Westchester, areas like that. And then even more detailed, which this map I just love. this map makes me just kind of drool. We are talking about Hudson Valley and glaciated Reading Prong Hudson Highlands. And I looking at these maps, I love to think about all those people that put in so much work in studying all these areas, and categorizing and just, oh my God, taking inventory, my goodness, and then just putting in all this information so that they can come up with these maps that they think are very accurate. And it's really, and I could imagine that, with the trend of global warming, that these maps will probably be highly inaccurate and are interchanging daily, and probably obsolete in a few years. So what types of ecosystems exist in our ecoregion? So we have tidal wetlands, which are flat vegetated areas that are subject to regular flooding by the tides. We have wetlands flooded by water, either permanently for years or decades, or seasonally for weeks or months. And we also have some meadows, land that is covered or mostly covered with grass and wildflowers. A very small percentage, I'll just note that. And we also have forests, an area of land dominated by trees. Oops. And then we'll talk about keystone species, which I mentioned my favorite person, Doug Tallamy, and he kind of came up with this term, keystone species. And he basically said that if you think of an arch, right, and how it is held up, and a lot of arches have this little keystone that holds the two sides together. And if you remove that keystone, the whole arch collapses. So he's found that there's a direct correlation between the plants that are available and how they affect wildlife and their populations. So mainly he does a lot of research on insects and caterpillar species, and looking at how those insects are able to feed and lay eggs, raise their young over winter, on these native plants or non-native plants, and how well the plant does in sustaining a population, because those insect populations are very important in providing food for either other insects or other birds, and then going in all directions through the food web. And he found that native plants, which have formed symbiotic relationships with native wildlife over millions of years, create the most productive and sustainable wildlife habitat. While some plants play a singular role for one or limited types of wildlife, others are essential to the life cycle of many species. So yeah, there are these specialists which really need one type of native plant that will just support a specific, so you might have like a spice bush moth, and that only will feed and use the spice bush as a food source, as a place to lay eggs, as a place to, host young and basically carry on its life cycle. So without that, you lose an entire species. Keystone plant genera are unique to local food webs within ecoregions. Remove keystone plants and the diversity and abundance of many essential insect species, which 96% of terrestrial birds rely on for food sources, will be diminished. The ecosystem collapses in a similar way that the removal of the keystone in ancient Roman arch will trigger its demise. So that's a way more articulate way of talking about what a keystone species is. And the research of entomologist Dr. Doug Tallamy and his team at the University of Delaware have identified 14% of native plants, the keystones, support 90% of butterfly and moth Lepidoptera species. The research of horticulturist Jared Fowler has shown that 15% to 60% of North American native bee species are pollen specialists who only eat pollen from 40% of native plants. And also plug, I hear there is another program on Monday which features some good Doug Tallamy things. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, and I will be registering. Pollinators are keystone species in most terrestrial ecosystems. Fruits and seeds derived from insect pollination are a major part of the diet of approximately 25% of all birds and of mammals ranging from redback voles to grizzly bears. Unfortunately, in many places, the essential service of pollination is at risk from habitat loss, pesticide use, and introduced diseases. And I think that this is really important to note, because I think as humans, at some point, I don't know where it came from, but at some point we were just like, we don't like bugs, right? They're annoying. They fly around. They buzz in our ears when we're trying to sleep. They chew at foundations of homes. They sting. They're a pest, and anything that looks like a bug, I want nothing to do with it. And also, I hate spiders, right? So, but we need to start thinking about the service of those insects, they and what they are doing and why they're here and why they are here in such abundance, and consider them also a vital part of nature and the food web. A lot of them are doing this essential service of pollination or providing food for other wildlife, and without them, this world would be I hate to even think about it, really. So let's talk plants. Here we have Elizabeth Gertrude Knight Britton. If you don't know who she is, look her up. Trees, sequestering pollutants, providing habitat and shade. And of course, I put this picture of a big, mighty oak leaf. So now we'll talk about, those keystone species, which Doug Tallamy has done incredible research and figured out that there are, he rates a lot of plants in a study that I read, and I just picked the top 3 to share with you all today, because if you don't have these top 3, well, it might be hard. I think if you don't have the space for an oak tree, you can't plant an oak tree, but you might have space for a perennial or something. But I always try, when I do landscape designs, I always try to first go to these top 3 keystone species and see if I can include them in the landscape design, because they are so important. So number 1, oaks, quercus. These trees support 445 caterpillar species as a host plant. And here we have white oak, Quercus alba, one of the most beautiful, stately trees you could ever imagine. And then over here you have black oak, the Quercus velutina. These were the 2 oaks that Doug categorized as being incredibly important to caterpillar species in particular. And, I know there's a lot of information about how beneficial they are to other things as well. Like, for instance, I know deer rely on the white oak for mass crops, because the white oak acorns are a lot more palatable than the red oak, which are a little bit more tart. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they're really not very edible, and they will eat them if there's nothing else. But what they really want is the white oak acorns. And number 2 with the silver medal is our cherries. in which 409 caterpillar species use these trees as a host plant. And you have an American plum, Prunus americana, the black cherry, Prunus serotina, and chokecherry, Prunus virginiana. This, first of all, this is a beautiful, beautiful tree, the American plum. And then the black cherry, we have them a lot in our woods. A lot of times they're kind of scraggly and also come down with black knot disease. They're kind of like a tree that comes and goes, but they are very beautiful. And obviously someone took this tree and just cleared everything else around it and said, you're going to have a beautiful spot in my garden. Looks like maybe it's a rose garden. And then you have this chokecherry, which is also really beautiful. Mostly it's a shrub, as what I've seen it, or a very small understory tree. I've seen them growing wild and very successful in Virginia, along with loblolly pines, and they are just beautiful when they're in bloom and very fragrant. And then number 3 with the bronze, we have birches, Betulus, in which 385 caterpillar species use these trees as a host plant. And here we have yellow birch, Betula alleghaniensis, the paper birch, Betulus papyrifera. And over here we have the river birch, Betula nigra, and sweet birch, Betula lenta. The sweet birch is the birch that is very fragrant, and you can actually make, birch beer or birch tea. This is a birch that this Betula nigra, the river birch, this is a birch that really likes it can withstand very wet conditions. So you might find it along close to wetlands, not actually submerged in the water, but on the edge. And that's another thing to note about some of these trees. They are all birches, but they have very different needs as far as light and soil and moisture. This is a beautiful, beautiful tree, which unfortunately is losing the battle, I think, against climate, because it has a very small hardiness zone, which is only zone 5 to 6, I think. And I think it tends to really like it a little bit cooler. So, as the zones kind of creep up and become warmer, this tree is having a hard time surviving. And then the sweet birch is a really great, woodland tree, as well as the yellow birch. I find a lot of them just hanging out in the woods and on your walks, and you probably don't even notice that they're there. And we'll talk about shrubs. And you can't talk about shrubs without a Monty Python, the knights who say knee. So shrubs, providing habitat, important food source for birds, filtering pollution before reaching drinking water. So that's mainly their main goal in life, whereas a tree is, sequestering carbon and helping us breathe as humans, if we think about plants and what they're doing for us as humans. And shrubs are very important in, especially in wetlands, in filtering out that water as it gets down into the ground and becomes drinking water. And number 1, with the gold medal, we have willows with 396 caterpillar species using these shrubs as a host plant. And 14 pollen specialist bee species rely on this plant. So without these willows, you would lose 14 bee species. And over here we have the pussy willow, Salix discolor, which we're all very fond of, I'm sure. And you have this prairie willow, which I've never actually seen in nurseries, but hope that I do one day. Salix humilis. And then you have your black willow, Salix nigra, which actually will grow into a pretty big shrub. And both of the 2 willows on either side do prefer wet conditions, but this prairie willow allegedly likes it a bit drier, which I would love to have a willow where I live, where it's very dry and rocky, and try that out. We also have blueberries, number 2. Love that. With 276 caterpillar species using these shrubs as a host plant, and 14 pollen specialist bee species rely on this plant. Over here, you have the high bush blueberry, Vicinium corymbosum, which gets pretty large. You have the low bush blueberry, Vicinium angustifolium, which the rockier areas such as like the Adirondacks are just littered with these, and they are just amazing. I mean, if you've ever been to Minnewaska and areas like that, Mohonk Mountain, they're just everywhere, and they're just so gorgeous, and they make these yummy little berries. And then you have the hillside blueberry, which I actually have in my woods here, Vicinium pallidum, and they like it a little bit shadier. And these blueberries tend to like a lot of acid soil. These are kind of a question mark for me, because I typically find them growing on limestone glades. But it says that they want an acid soil at every nursery. And then these, I think, have a better tolerance for maybe a bit neutral soil, because I'm sure where I live, the soil is pretty neutral. It's not as acid as like a bog or something like that. Also, you know, if you want to think about the last presentation before I move on to the next slide, and what we were talking about with the different pollinators, and we learned a little bit about each of the different pollinators. This particular shrub has a flower that can pretty much only be pollinated by a bumblebee, because the bee needs to be able to get in that flower. This has like a bell-shaped flower, and the bee needs to get in there and vibrate and get the pollen off. And this is called, you know, buzz pollination, which other pollinators aren't specialized like that to retrieve the pollen and therefore spread it around. And then number 3, with the bronze medal, we have viburnum, which are lovely shrubs, and 105 caterpillar species use these shrubs as a host plant. We have the black haw, Viburnum prunifolium. There are so many viburnums, y'all. The northern wild raisin, Viburnum casinoides. This is the straight species. I know this has also been hybridized to be miniature. They have a shrub that's it only gets to be about 3 feet wide by maybe a foot tall or something. It makes really nice berries. And then you have Viburnum lentego, the nanny berry, and the high bush cranberry, Viburnum opulus americana. This is highly sought out by cedar waxwings. And all of these viburnums have very different berries. You know, they range from colors from black to blue to pink to purple. To red. And then we'll talk about flowering perennials, which are sources of nectar and pollen for insects and bees that aid in pollination and eliminate pests. And then number one with the gold medal, we have goldenrod. Love this plant. It's like, yes, so yellow is my favorite color. And when I see this plant in bloom, I say, oh my God, fall is here, which is my favorite time of year. 122 caterpillar species use these perennials as a host plant. 42 pollen specialists bee species rely on this plant. And over here we have stiff goldenrod. They all look pretty similar, right? We have stiff goldenrod, which is Solidago rigida. You have the gray goldenrod, Solidago nemoralis, which has a little bit different color foliage, a little bit of blue in there. And the flowers are also a little bit stretched out on their racemes. And then you have giant goldenrod, Solidago gigantea. And this one's very tall. Yep. If you haven't put that together. These are wonderful late pollen resources for many of our pollinators. I also know of a beekeeper that was concerned when they were raising bees, and they went to check on the hive and they noticed the smell, and they said, oh my God, this is terrible. And it smelled like dirty socks. And they called some other, professionals, specialists, other beekeepers to come and take a look at it. And they said, oh no, that's just the time of year. This is what your honey smells like when they're foraging goldenrod, and it's okay. And then number two with the silver medal, we have Symphotrichum, which used to be aster. I love it when they change the botanical name to something really tough like Symphotrichum. So 108 caterpillar species use these perennials as a host plant, with 33 pollen specialist bee species relying on this plant. And here we have the bluewood aster, Symphotrichum cordifolium. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Use this a lot. I use asters a lot. Smooth aster, Symphotrichum labe, and then the calico aster, Symphotrichum lateriflorum. And then we have the Helianthus, the sunflowers, with 66 caterpillar species using these perennials as a host plant, and 50 pollen specialist bee relying on this plant. We have the woodland sunflower, Helianthus divaricatus, a small woodland sunflower, Helianthus microcephalus, and the pale leaf sunflower, Helianthus stramosus. And notice that our native sunflowers are very different to, what you think of as a sunflower. If you think of a field of sunflowers. And also, I think obviously this sunflower likes woods, I'm pretty sure this sunflower can deal with a little bit more sun. And I think that this sunflower is found mostly in like edge of wetland. But don't quote me on that because I'm not very familiar with Helianthus stromosus. And here again is my little flow chart that I find to be very articulate in what the whole, goal in this presentation is. And I'm just putting it all out there with a picture and an easy to follow path. And at least 80% of our world's crop species require pollination to set seed. An estimated 1 out of every 3 bites of food comes to us through the work of animal pollinators. And here's the troubling statistics. 28% of all North American bumblebees are facing some degree of extinction risk. 19% of butterfly and moth populations are facing decline, including those that are generalists and ones with habitat-specific needs. I'm sure most of you know that monarchs have been placed on the endangered list. 5 butterfly species have gone extinct since 1950. 17 species of beetles are listed as threatened or endangered. 60% of beetles are facing decline. Without bats and birds as pollinators, studies show a decline in fruit and seed production of 80%. Pollinator failure leads to food web failure, leads to biodiversity failure, leads to agricultural failure, leads to economic failure, leads to human failure. What can you do? So never use any pesticides, including rodenticide, insecticides, herbicides, or chemical fertilizers. And note that organic products are a potential danger to pollinators as well. Plant native plants that are specific to your ecoregion and well suited for your site. Rethink your lawn, reduce the size, reduce the mowing frequency. Remove invasive plants and rethink alien exotic plant choices. Allow leaves and debris that fall from trees in autumn to remain until spring or in perpetuity. And go to the Pollinator Pathway website for more information. And here are a few nurseries that I use and I find have a very good stock of native plants and also native cultivars, nativars. If you'd like to write some of these down and investigate and see if they have what you need. A lot of these nurseries also do not raise any of their stock using pesticides or even fungicides. Like I think they're very thoughtful about their propagating and their nurseryhood. And they also sometimes will use, like I know One Nature in Beacon, I think sources all their seeds from locally sourced plants. So it means that they are getting the ecotype that is most local. So they're not getting seed from, Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. It is, Hudson Valley seed, Hudson Valley gathered. And that is all I got. So I'm looking forward to answer some questions. And thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Maya. We do have a couple questions that came in while you were speaking. So the first question is from one of our Woodstock Pollinator Pathway experts, lovely gentleman, Del Orlusky. He asks, plants like oaks are wind pollinated. Can you talk a little bit more about wind pollination and keystone species?
Oaks are wind pollinated. Well, I think, the keystone species, so wind pollination may be how the actual pollen is moved from plant to plant or flower to flower. But, pollinators do rely a lot on these keystone species as a place to get food. They will munch on the leaves. They will lay eggs in the twigs and on the leaves, in the furrows of, the oak bark. And I think that's why they are really the number one as a keystone species in that regard, because they not only, and I think that their pollen is also very nutritious to pollinators through the flowers, if I'm not mistaken.
Awesome. I love the oak. I have a lovely oak that is also supporting wildlife other than pollinators. When we had a mast year, I think it was 2 years ago here up in the Catskills, we had black bears that climbed to the very top of our oak tree in our front yard. The cub climbed and just fed himself full of acorns to get himself ready for hibernation. So oaks not only host insects and caterpillars, they also host large mammals.
Yes, we also have a nesting pair of red-shouldered hawks in our we have what are these oaks? These oaks are the name is going to escape me at the moment because I'm in the deer in the headlight moment. Like, what is the name? It'll come to me, but
they're great. We love them. They're beautiful. So I had some other questions come in. Someone did ask, what was the name of the woman that was highlighted when you said, now let's talk about plants? So she just asked what her name was again.
Gertrude Knight Britton. She is a pioneer woman botanist and, helped start many programs and just went through, she was one of those people that I felt like would be one of the biologists who helped create, that map of all the ecoregions. Like that would be her job, but she kind of took it on herself in a time where, women weren't supposed to really get involved and go to school and stuff like that. So I love
that. Another question has come in asking, does leaving leaves on the lawn in the fall protect ticks as well? I don't want to encourage more ticks.
So I think, and this is based on some of my own field research, that, sometimes you have this. So one of the things that I think that I learned that was most valuable to me, and this actually came from Rick Darka, who, if you're not familiar with him, write down his name too, because he is just a encyclopedia of knowledge. But he talks about there being a threshold for pests, and a pest may get out of control, but it needs to get to a certain point before a predator sees it as a good opportunity to come in, and that it has enough food, that will sustain not only the predator, but they can, raise young in the area. And then those levels come back down again. And it's a little bit frightening, I think, when you think about, the damage that a tick can do. But I am out there a lot and I just stay, totally covered up, pants tucked in the socks and everything, and do a quick check, a good thorough check, not a quick check, but a good thorough check, and check myself for ticks, a few times. And then I get in the shower and I scrub myself like crazy. And, I hope that, by leaving the leaves and maybe letting wild areas go, you invite things like opossums or turkeys that are, natural predators of ticks.
I mean, that's great. Let Mother Nature take care of the pest issue.
And sometimes it takes a while, and you might be sitting there thinking, oh my God, I just want to, spray this cedar oil and be done with it. But, the more you spray or the more intervention humans have on a pest, you will never reach that threshold level, and that was one thing that Rick Darka really was very emphatic about, was, the more you are involved in controlling this pest, you will always be controlling this pest.
Interesting perspective. Another question has come in from Linda. She asks, what can be used as a ground cover to replace my lawn if I choose to mow less or not mow at all?
Well, I think there are so many different, I would highly recommend going to one of those websites, and you can go through their catalogs of plants and find, exactly what you need in terms of, light or height that you're looking for, and what kind of water needs the plants may need. There's no one blanket answer for everybody, and of course you have your own likes and dislikes. You may hate purple flowers and love orange or something like that. So they make these custom seed mixes, I know, through Prairie Nursery and Prairie Moon Nursery, that are just wonderful. And you can actually customize them to, you might find like a short prairie grass mix. And if maybe that one species will not do well at your house, you can ask them to remove it and they will do that. And I think that's really helpful.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that was even an option.
Yeah.
They do wonderful things all over the place. I love that. Another question has come in from Zach. He says, first of all, thank you so much for this great talk. I was wondering two things. Could you talk a little bit more about your design process when you're designing a native garden? And also, I'm interested in, oh my God, I am going to murder this because I always murder the botanical names, Vaccinium pallidum or palladium?
Pallidum.
Okay, I was close. And I was wondering if you could talk about your experience with the plant, like what kind of conditions it prefers, where you're located, and thank you again.
Vaccinium pallidum, that is a plant that I look for. I hope that anytime I talk to somebody who grows plants for a living, I say, can you please grow this plant for me? Because seems to be so versatile. It doesn't require a lot of water from what I can see. It is right there intertwined as an understory plant under oaks, like dense groves, dense forest. And I've also seen it grow right on the rock ledge, and so it's beautiful. It's a beautiful plant. It has a great, wildlife value. So I can't say enough in praise of Vaccinium pallidum and how we need more of this plant, in propagation. And as far as, designing process for designing a native garden, first I try and let the land tell me what to do. I gather as much information as I can about the space and, what it's like throughout the season, and then make some choices based on that. About I also, take inventory of what is doing well, or what the area is um, in terms of, plant communities, and then I make you know some executive choices based on that, and try and come up with a palette that is not only visually pleasing, but does a lot for the surrounding ecosystem, and is supporting in that.
That sounds great. I love that process. Um, so we have another question from an anonymous question asker. First, they say, thank you, Maya. They say, I have not raked my leaves to give the beetles a refuge during the winter. When would it be safe to rake?
So my next presentation is going to be about methods for maintenance. And I say I don't rake anything until around, yeah, I always take the no mow May challenge. And so right after, I don't rake at all. I just mow. I just mow my leaves, after the no mow May challenge is done. But if you have an area that's maybe, of course, I always keep, pathways or driveways clear of leaves, because I don't really think that's a safe space for them to be overwintering where you're driving cars or walking. But I tend to just leave leaves until around the mid-May or later, if I can.
That's what I've heard as well from lots of folks. Give them a chance to, the eggs to hatch and those tiny little baby insects to grow into adulthood and, go off and do their thing. So I think that's great advice. Lots of people ask that question a lot too.
Yeah.
The next question comes in from Cheryl. She says, for beginners, is this area, excuse me, let me start over. For beginners in this area who are looking for ecoregion plant lists, have you used or do you recommend the ones from pollinator.org? It looks like we would be in the Eastern Broadleaf Forest Oceanic Province.
I am not familiar with that site, so I will have to check it out. Looking for ecoregion.
Do you have a source that you prefer over another for ecoregion plant lists?
Unfortunately, I don't. I just have a library of books. That's how I do. I do the old tried and true way of going through the books. I have a giant library that I'm looking at over here, and I just have. I'm sorry, but I just have enough experience to where I kind of know the plants for this area, but it would be something that I would probably need if I were to be designing somewhere like California, like where do I find that information? I'm not sure. Oh, there's heritage websites that different states will put out, which at least give you an idea of is what the native plants are for the state.
Oh, that's great. Another person in the chat said that they highly recommend bplant.org for the last question about the ecoregion plant list. And they asked if we could mention it. So I will mention it. It's in the chat. Bplant.org
Cool.
for folks. Okay, another question. Can you tell us the common name of the plant you were talking about just before that you wish more people would propagate, more nurseries would propagate,
The
which
common
I murdered the name of?
so that was the oh, what is that? That was the
Vaccinium.
blueberry.
It was
Vixinium
a
pallidum. I think it's not a woodland because usually pallida, in Latin names they refer to it, the space that the plant is found. Let me see if I can just minimize this and go back to my presentation and I can pull that up. Hillside blueberry. That's what it was.
Oh, okay. All right. So our next question. I have a few types of milkweed seeds I'd like to plant this spring. I'm assuming I have to stratify them. What's an easy way?
I think milkweed is pretty easy to get to germinate, assuming that you know the type of milkweed you have. Like I know the swamp milkweed obviously likes a lot of water and needs to be pretty moist. Soil needs to be pretty moist to germinate them. And yeah, there's so many different types of milkweeds. And they differ in, like you have the butterfly weed, which is also a milkweed, which likes it a little bit drier. And I think in terms of temperature, the best time actually, if you're going to seed something out there, just wild seed in a spot, they actually recommend that winter is a very good time to seed outside because of the freeze and thaw of the ground actually kind of rises up and grabs the seed and incorporates it in to the surface, rather than going and like pushing it with your fingers or doing it mechanically.
Yeah, we've actually spoken quite a bit about seed sowing in the winter,
Mm.
or late fall, early winter seed sowing. So, I we've also done seed exchanges, so we have lots of exposure to seeds. So if anybody is ever interested in the future, usually in October, the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway hosts a native seed exchange. And that's where we encourage folks who are planting for pollinators locally to save their seeds once the blooms die off. Save your seeds from your plants, from your garden, and bring them to the seed exchange and share with other interested folks. And that way we can have a really lovely, diverse plantings all over the place,
I
which
love
is
that idea.
super important for biodiversity.
Locally sourced, and
Yeah,
you may need some asters and someone wants some goldenrods and you can share.
exactly. I am just looking to see if we have any more questions in the chat, because we've had some questions in the Q&A and some coming from the chat. So let me just scroll through the chat a little bit to make sure I'm not missing anybody. In the chat, there's another great resource from Zach, who's talking about water stratifying milkweed seeds. I'm going to copy everything that comes into the chat, any resources, suggestions that people have given throughout the entire program. And when I mail out the recording of the program, I'll also mail out the resources that were shared in this chat. We really love the idea of people sharing information and resources. So I always like to make sure that that's provided to everybody after the program's over. So I think we might have one more question. Yes, one more question. Can you explain the pollination of blueberries? Buzz pollination, I think you mentioned, he finds it fascinating and he'd love to hear a little bit more if you know a little bit more.
It's so funny. So there are, when you think about the different shapes of flowers, and how they actually have evolved to, invite and almost seduce like certain pollinators to come and pollinate them. the bell-shaped flowers are the type of flowers that seduce the bumblebee, because they can get right in there. And I remember from, if you remember from the last presentation I had, you know, bumblebee butts like just hanging out of flowers, and they're just so adorable. And that's all you see when, I think there's an Instagram page of, you know, bumblebee butts, and they just get in there and they do this vibrating with their body, which releases the pollen, and then it just gets on their bodies and on their legs. Like bumblebees also have a way of collecting pollen and storing it on their legs. Um, and so that's what buzz pollination is. It's just the process of actually getting in the flower, you know, so the flower's like this and the bee comes in and gets in there and then just kind of vibrates around and all the pollen falls on them, and then they can then exit and go to the next flower.
It's so fascinating how, different species of different, plants and insects, they evolve, they co-evolve. And so like this one plant needs to be buzzed to release its pollen, and there is an insect that comes in and provides that service to buzz the flower to release the pollen. I love those types of kind of like, not kind of, definitely those symbiotic relationships. They survive because they work together. It's a
Yeah,
partnership. It's wonderful.
yeah.
Um, and one of our pollinator pathway committee members just said something in the chat that was very funny. He says he's going to be a bumblebee buzzing pollinator for Halloween next year.
I love it. Oh my
So I
God.
think that is I think that is a wonderful note to end on. A lovely buzzing bumblebee bottom. So there's just a few things I would like to say. On behalf of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway Planning Committee, I want to thank Maya for sharing her knowledge with us. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As I said previously, the recording of this presentation, as well as any resources mentioned in the chat, will be provided in an email in the coming days. And just a reminder that Maya's third and final presentation will highlight land management best practices to nurture habitat for pollinators. And that presentation will be March 23rd. And we hope you will all be joining us. A link to register for that presentation will be in the email I sent with the link to the recording of this program. So thank you once again from all of us at the Pollinator Pathway. Thank you, Maya. We hope you all have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. My pleasure.